This is episode 76 of the Why Not Me podcast, Making Peace with Worst Case Scenario. I'm your host, Anita Bremer. I'm a wife, mom, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a life coach. This podcast is for Latter-day Saint moms who want to take their personal development deeper, truly overcome their inner obstacles, and endure this life well. Okay, so we had last day of school yesterday. So we're getting into the swing of summer now. I have mixed feelings about that. I love spending time with my kids, but I also don't love them spending time on TV and computers and not having anything to do. So it's always a balance, right? So there are about 40 of you regular listeners, I'm guessing, based off of the stats on my podcast, but I only have 10 ratings and 5 reviews. So I'm going to ask you for a huge favor. And would you please go leave me a rating and review and just tell me what your favorite takeaway is? It'll give you something to say in your review, and it's super helpful for me to hear what is helpful for you. Today, I want to talk about one of the things that what I see in my coaching practice and my own experience and the experience of my kids and friends and, just people that I come in contact with. One of the major causes of anxiety is worry about the future. And it's because our brains are wired for this. Our brains are wired for protecting us and keeping us safe. So part of the job of your brain is to anticipate anything that could go wrong. Now, oftentimes what that means is going to a worst case scenario in your mind. This kicks up a lot of resistance, right? Because if we're thinking about the very worst thing that could happen, our brain is going to be like, no, that's terrible. We can't do that. Danger, danger, danger. Kicks up tons of resistance. It's like a sign or a symbol to us that something could go wrong. It's meant to help us pause and think and plan and all of that, but we don't always do that, right? We sometimes get caught in the sort of fiction land of worst case scenario. And then we get all emotional and distraught about it or anxious or whatever. And then we can't come to the problem solving or the planning from a grounded, calm, best self point of view. So today I have some thoughts and tools for you to consider when you notice yourself dwelling on a future worst case scenario. This isn't as helpful when we're thinking about rumination on the past, but maybe I'll create a podcast episode for that as well. The first thought that I want to offer you is that the future is all a fantasy anyway. The future hasn't happened yet. It's wide open. Anything could happen, right? At any time. We just think we know what will happen. And oftentimes we're right? We think that, okay, I'm going to go throughout my day. I've got some errands to run. I'm going to go on a date with my husband. And then I'm going to brush my teeth and get in my pajamas and go to sleep. And then I'm going to sleep. And, probably much of that will happen, right? But not always. I don't know, we could have a tornado and our house could disappear. There's me going to a worst case scenario, right? Or I don't know, something could prevent me from being able to do the things that I think I'm going to do today, right? The future is all a fantasy. It's all fictional. We just simply think we will know what will happen. I have an episode on this. It's called Anxiety versus Faith that covers the advantages of not knowing. Sometimes when we think I won't know, and I'm actually going to talk about this a little bit later in the episode as well, it's I won't know. And so it causes anxiety. But sometimes we can be like, I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there. I don't know, and I'm not supposed to know. So when we think about the future and where our brain often goes is this could happen, or what if this happens, or what if this happens, or what if this happens, and they're all negative, we can remind ourselves that I don't actually know. It's all made up in my mind anyway. And I also want to just kind of a sub thought under here is what we think about is what we focus on is what we create, right? So if we're spending a lot of time and energy thinking about possible worst case scenarios, that is what we're focusing on. And that is what we will create because that's just what we're spending time creating in our minds, right? It's almost like a spiritual creation. We create it in our minds and then we feel it. We think it's like, okay, this is like for sure, right? And then we go and do it. It's like a domino effect. It just happens that way. The danger here is that if we really lean into this idea that what we think about is what we focus on, is what we create, the danger is to think, well, I'll just think something different then. And we can do that, right? We actually do this naturally often. But if you just try to redirect your brain and your brain keeps coming back to this worst case scenario or this anxious feeling or something like that, then it's just silver lining the worst case scenario when you try to just think something different. If we ignore our brain and what it offers us long enough, but it thinks it's actually a danger, then it will just get louder and louder until we hear it. That is part of how I think of anxiety, not entirely, but sometimes anxiety is like, oh, this thing in the future might happen and I will feel sad about it and that's dangerous. So we need to prevent it. So like pay attention here, something dangerous might be coming. And if we just ignore, then it escalates into anxiety. That's one of the ways I approach in my coaching is if somebody describes anxiety, I am often thinking about what might be under the anxiety. What is it that they don't want to see or feel, right? Anxiety often is a primary emotion like anger, sadness, something like that, that we are not allowing ourselves to feel. And so it escalates. Our body is like, pay attention to me. And when we don't, it gets louder and louder. And the way it gets louder is by turning into anxiety or sometimes panic or panic attacks, right? So sometimes we have to actually give our bodies or our brains a say. It's kind of like the toddler who's like, mommy, 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 right? And if we ignore the toddler's just going to get louder or going to act out or something. They're going to get our attention somehow, right? And if we just stop and pause and get down on their level and look at them in their eyes and say, hey, what do you need? Then they're like, I just had to tell you, I saw a blah, 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 right? And they have this big story. And then the story gets out of the way and then they're fine. This also happens with children when they're like, oh, I have an owie. I have an owie. I have an owie. I have an owie. And as adults, we're like, oh, you'll be fine, right? This is what we're thinking. We're like, yes, you have an owie. You'll be fine. It's not that bad, right? So we kind of like brush it aside. But sometimes if we just stop, pause, get on their level, look at them in the eyes and say, yeah, you have an owie. Then they're just like, okay, I have an owie. And they move on, right? This is the same thing our brains do. Our brains like, there's an owie, or I'm afraid there might be an owie, or I really want to tell you something. And if we ignore it long enough, it'll just get louder and louder. It'll catch our attention somehow. Now, all this happens on kind of a subconscious level. It's not like you're thinking, oh, I need to pay attention to myself, my feelings, right? It's just like, it's all running in your favor all of the time. Your job is just to pay attention. And we don't always pay attention, right? Sometimes when we pause, we slow down, we look ourselves in the eye, and we just hear the story or we see the owie, then the brain will simmer down. The way I do this with my clients is I follow it to the end. What are you anxious about? What are you worried about? What's going on with worst case scenario? Because sometimes our tendency as humans is to be like, oh, that won't happen. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it, right? Except that our brains are like, no, I am worrying about it. So we just have to give some space and time for, okay, what are you worried about? And if that happens, and if that happens, and if that happens, and you just keep following it, and you know you're at the end of the trail when all that is left is a feeling. I'm going to talk about some examples in a little bit. When you know the feeling, you will probably recognize you are already feeling this feeling, or maybe you're feeling the beginnings of this feeling. So if the feeling is, oh, I'll be really anxious, then you might be anxious now. If the feeling is, well, I'll be really sad, you might be feeling anxious now because you don't want to feel sad, right? So there's something there. There's something that you're feeling now that because your brain has raced ahead to the future, it has already forecasted everything. And it's like, oh my gosh, when we get to the end of this trail, there's going to be a terrible feeling and I don't want to feel it. And so instead, now I will feel something else, or I'll feel it ahead of time. And when you know what the feeling is, like I said, you're probably already feeling some version of it, which means you're so good at it. If you get there, or when you get there in the future, you'll be good at it. You'll totally be able to handle it. I think that oftentimes this worst case scenario thinking is us feeling like I won't be able to handle it. I won't somehow I won't have the capacity or the knowledge or whatever. I won't be able to handle it. It's this like disempowerment that we tell ourselves. And the antidote, I believe, is leaning into, I'll totally be able to handle it. Right? Because that's the truth. We are always handling everything that comes to us at any point in time. We might not be handling it well, right? But we are always handling things. Okay, the third tool, this is more of a tool than a thought, is to plan for the worst case scenario. Sometimes our brains are like, this might happen, this might happen, this might happen. And if we're telling ourselves, I won't know what to do, then you get to just decide now what you're going to do. I have an episode, I don't remember which episode it's in, but I have a story that I tell about how I used to be so anxious about driving in the snow. And once I had a few coaching tools under my belt, I realized that what I was really anxious about was not getting into a wreck, was not getting stuck on the side of the road. It was, I won't know what to do. And so I just decided what I would do. I just decided, well, I'll most likely have my phone with me. And so I will call my husband, or I'll call 911. And that will be my first step. And then I thought, oh, but there are things that I could do to prevent something possibly from happening. One of the things that I don't know why I was so scared of this was getting stuck with a bunch of cars behind me. Like my wheels won't turn, right? And I'm like causing this like big backup and I'm in the way, right? There's probably a metaphor there for me to unpack. But I thought, oh, well, I could just put my car in park and have a shovel and some sand in the back of my van and put some sand underneath or near the tires so that it has something to grip. Because that's honestly, I live in the suburbs. I'm not going to get like stuck on the side of the road, like in a ditch or something. I mean, I could, I guess, but the likelihood is pretty small. It's more these like rolling hills where I'll get stuck on like a little bit of an uphill and my tires won't have grip in the snow. And so I just put a folding shovel and a bag of sand in the back of my van. And then I thought, oh, I feel so much better. I am well equipped if something were to happen. And then my anxiety about driving in the snow went way down. And then we moved to Germany and sold our car. And when we came back, we bought a 4-wheel drive car, and my anxiety is still way down. So when we have this worst case scenario running on autoplay in our minds, sometimes we have to stop and be like, well, what will I do? Like, it's like the toddler that's just like, oh my gosh, what if the house catches on fire? What if the house catches on fire? What if the house catches on fire? And we're like, oh, well, if the house catches on fire, I'll leave the house and I'll go to a neighbor and I'll call 911, or I'll call 911 as I'm leaving the house. Like, we can plan for these things, right? Except that our brain gets stuck on the actual problem instead of, and then what happens is, oh my gosh, if the house catches on fire, I'm going to be so afraid. And the emotion goes up and the logic goes down. Right. So all of these tools and thoughts are to help us get to a place where we aren't hijacked by our emotion, and we can think logically and plan and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And we can practice it. We can practice it in our minds if we want to even. Okay. Number 4 is to balance the worst case scenario with the best case scenario. Our brains are so good at going to worst case scenario because they're wired for looking out for any possible dangers. We're not so good at thinking about best case scenarios. And here's the thing. Oftentimes we tell ourselves, we learn some of these tools and we tell ourselves, oh, well, I mean, the future is fiction. So I just will not think about that thing. I don't want to create it. So I'll just think about something else. Sometimes that works. And sometimes it boomerangs and it comes back, and our brain or our body is like, no, we really need to think about this. So then instead of silver lining, which is that adding that positive thought on top of what we're really scared of or anxious about, we give it some space and time, right? We plan for it. We decide ahead of time what we'll do. But sometimes we just think, okay, well, I'm just not going to go to the worst case scenario. I'm going to train myself to not do that. And I think instead of just saying, okay, I just won't do it, it's like telling yourself, just don't think about a yellow school bus. Oh my gosh, what just popped into your head? A yellow school bus, right? It's the first thing your brain will do. So instead, use this fantastic skill that you have for yourself in your own favor. When you notice yourself going to worst case scenario, just redirect to best case scenario. There's no need to be like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about worst case scenario again, and I shouldn't be. And this is the problem, blah, blah, blah. No, we don't make it a problem. We're just like, oh, my brain's thinking about worst case scenario again. Probably for a lot of us, it's just a habit and a skill that we've developed over lots and lots of years. It's not going to go away without some practice, right? And we don't practice not doing something, we practice doing something else. So when you notice your brain going to worst case scenario because you've practiced it, because it's used to it, then just go, oh, and then I'm also going to just balance this worst case scenario out with the best case scenario, right? So if I drive in the snow, worst case scenario is I get into a terrible car accident and I get taken to the hospital. Best case scenario is I totally can drive in the snow. I arrive to my destination without any problem at all. But do we give that any airtime in our minds? Not really, right? Because we're like, there's no problem with that. There's nothing like that we have to plan for. But what if we just use this skill of building stories that haven't happened yet in our minds? We use them for ourselves, right? So I have a senior who just graduated. And I think about the things that went through my mind when I was graduated, but hadn't yet started college. And I think about oh my gosh, what if I go to college and I don't make any friends and it's such a terrible experience? but we don't give any airtime to what if I go to college and I make tons of friends and I have so much fun and I love it? Why don't we do that? Right? Because that's like so much more fun to think about. So don't try to get rid of the worst case scenario. Just try to add in a balance. Try to add in the best case scenario or something better, right? Okay, I'm going to talk about some examples. And here's some common ones that I have myself experienced and I hear my clients or people around me talking about. The first one is I won't be able to sleep. Now, I don't know what it is about sleep and the worry about not being able to sleep, but it's pretty common. I personally have not had this problem so much. Every once in a while, like I remember when my babies were really little, just wanting to sleep so desperately and being like, oh, the baby's going to wake up. I'm not going to be able to sleep. I have this big thing tomorrow. Like, how many of us, I have an early flight. I have to wake up. I can't sleep through my alarm. I'm going to sleep through my alarm. Oh my gosh, what if that happens? This is going to be terrible, right? And it hasn't even happened yet, except our brains go to it anyway. So some version of I won't be able to sleep or I won't be able to, get to sleep on time and then I'll sleep in. When we think about not being able to sleep, how does that feel? Feels like anxiety and worry, right? And what does anxiety do? It activates us. It puts us in a state of not like this sleepy, restful state, but this like super awake, activated, on edge state. So it actually creates for us the very thing that we don't want. What if you won't be able to sleep? Okay, well, if I won't be able to sleep, then I'll be really tired tomorrow. Okay, what if you're really tired tomorrow? If I'm really tired tomorrow, then I won't be able to do the thing that I want to do. I have this thing going on tomorrow and I won't function at my best. Okay, what if you don't function at your best? Well, if I don't function at my best, then it'll be a disaster and I will fail. Okay, what if you fail? If I fail, I will just feel totally mortified, embarrassed, ashamed. Okay, now we're at the feeling, right? Like I said, we know when we followed it all the way to the end when we get to a feeling. I kind of want to take this one step further because I said multiple feelings, right? So what if you're terrified? Or mortified? What if you are embarrassed? What if you're ashamed? Well, then I'll just totally feel completely ashamed. Okay, there's the feeling at the end. Shame. Now, in this example, we're not feeling shame in the current moment if we're thinking I won't be able to sleep. We're feeling something like anxiety or worry, right? But what our brains, this is how I think of it. I think my brain is just so smart. It has already zoomed ahead to what I think is going to be the future. And it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to feel shame. So instead of feeling some shame, I'll just be like worried and anxious, right? Kind of silly. When I think about it, if I think about feeling shame, I'm like, well, I'm actually really good at feeling shame. And I'll just be ashamed then. Like, what if we could just be like, oh, I'll just be sad then? The problem is that for so many of us, we so desperately don't want to feel those feelings that we're like, I would rather feel much more terribly and feel some anxiety. Isn't that so backwards? Okay, here's another example. My kid will leave the church. Oh my gosh, my child doesn't want to go to mutual anymore or seminary or whatever it is. They don't want to go to church. This means so I'm going to do the exercise, right? I'm just going to take you through the steps. It's a fantasy. Maybe my kid will leave the church or maybe not. I don't actually know what's going to happen. But if it keeps coming back, let's give it some airtime, right? Oh, yeah, you're worried. You're worried that maybe your kid will leave the church. Let's follow it to the end. Yeah, and if they leave the church, then what? Well, then I'll feel like a terrible mother. I'll feel like I did something wrong. I will blame myself. And if you blame yourself, if you feel like you did something wrong, then I will feel completely defeated, inadequate. Okay. Then can we just feel that way? Now, number 3, right? Number 2 is don't try to silver line it. Just give it some airtime. Number 3 is plan for it. Okay, so what if my kid doesn't want to go to seminary or mutual or whatever it is, church? What will you do? And every parent is going to be different in this example, right? Some parents are going to be like, well, I will honor their agency and I will just be quiet and not say anything. Some parents are like, no, I'm going to make some rules. Like, if you live at our house, you go to church every Sunday, and I don't care if you're engaged. That's just what we do in our house. And some parents might be like, well, I will just testify and encourage and love. And I'll be like, I really think you should go to church, or I really think you should go to mutual, or whatever it is. Just decide now. Decide now what you will do or feel when your child leaves the church. If that's what your brain is so worried about, then what? What if your child leaves the church? What will you do? What will you say? And then balance it out with the best case scenario. Maybe if your kid starts not wanting to go to mutual, they will want to leave the church, but we don't actually know that. So what if them not going to mutual is like the best thing ever? What if they actually like spend time on doing something they want to do, and then they get to become the best at whatever they do? Like for me, my kid wants to be an actress, so maybe she's going to spend time going to acting classes instead, or watching videos or something like that. And then she's going to become the best actress. And then she's going to be super successful in her career. Like, oh, and maybe when she's successful, she'll realize there's something missing in her life. And then she'll come back to the church. Just like, okay, yeah, I could imagine that. I could imagine her not going to mutual or seminary, and maybe her testimony gets stronger somehow. Maybe that's the path. I don't really know what's right for her, right? Okay, last example. I won't know what to do. So this, I kind of mentioned a little bit in the story with not loving driving in the snow, but I had this sweet teenager come get some coaching from me, and she had some hard stuff that happened to her. But when we kind of slowed down and pulled everything apart, it was really this idea of it'll be my responsibility and I won't know what to do. And I'm like, okay, well, what if you don't know what to do? Is that okay that sometimes we don't know what to do? And it was this feeling of shame underneath it. If it's my responsibility and I don't know what to do and I should know what to do, that was what was really tripping her up, then I will feel totally ashamed. And I was just like, okay, well, can you feel ashamed? Right. And she's just like, no, I don't want to feel ashamed. Of course, none of us want to feel ashamed. But when we tell ourselves, I won't know what to do, it causes us some anxiety, and like it could even shut us down. It could get us into this like frozen state. Like, I won't know what to do. I don't even know what to do right now. Uh, I'm stuck. Right. So it's not helpful. What if we can just make peace with, yeah, maybe I won't know what to do, and I'll figure it out, or I'll pray and Heavenly Father will help me. Like, I'm not always supposed to know what to do at any point, right? Like, I've been a mother for 18 years, 18 and a half years, and I'm still like figuring it out. And I don't know what to do often. But when I think about it in terms of I won't know what to do, and then it'll cause me so much anxiety, all that happens is I feel anxiety now. Like, oh my gosh, what if I don't know what to do? Instead of like, oh, yeah, I don't always know what to do. and I might not know what to do, and I'll figure it out. And here's another thought that I love. There are always people around to help. Like it's so rare when we're in a situation where we're just like completely alone and no resources, nothing. Super rare. At least where I live in suburbs, it seems like there's always people around. I see people broken down on the side of the freeway, and then I see someone else behind them, like helping them out. Right. So it's like, I just trust that maybe I won't know what to do, but somebody will. There will be somebody there to help me. There will be some angel who will come along because Heavenly Father knows me and he knows what I need. That's kind of an extra tool there for you, is leaning into the powers that are bigger than you. We won't always know what to do. We might not be able to sleep. Our kids might leave the church. Terrible things might happen. They are happening. And it's not all up to me and it's not all my responsibility. And there is someone or something greater than me who has it all under control. I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but ultimately we're just this little speck, right? And we're only doing our little tiny part. Okay, that is enough for now. And so are you. I also wanted to mention that I'm holding my Understanding Trauma workshop again because I had several people reach out and say, "Oh, I couldn't come. Are you going to have a replay?" And so this time I'm going to record it and I'll send out the replay, even if you can't make it. But I think I'm going to do it a few times more just to kind of perfect it and get it better and really understand with trauma what people want to know and what kind of is tripping them up. So it's just a very basic class about trauma and your nervous system and how trauma could show up just sort of in your day-to-day living that you don't even think of as trauma responses. It's going to be June 2nd. That's a Thursday, I believe, at 12 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So that would be 11 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Mountain time, 1 p.m. Central, and 2 p.m. Eastern. I would love it if you would join me. I will drop the link to register, and all it is it's a link that then an email will be sent to you, and it has the day and the time and the Zoom link for you. I'll drop that in the show notes. In the meantime, I would just love it if you would leave a review. Thank you, friend, for leaving a review, telling me your favorite thought or concept you've gained from listening. If you're ready to overcome your inner obstacles and show up to this human experience as your highest self, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free session with me. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.